It's Thursday, February 15th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Football Show. It is a hell of a day to talk ball, and joining me to do just that is Dalton Del Don. Dalton, what's going on, buddy?
You know, Harmon, for 2 weeks leading up to the Super Bowl, I debated spending a bunch of money on what could be a life experience, knowing that KC might win this game, or staying married. And Harmon, buddy, I chose the former. I ended up going to the game, last minute decision here. In all seriousness, with the blessing of my wife, I was lucky to go to my first Super Bowl ever, or as Dave Damashek might call it, a must-win game. It was a wild experience, dude. It's coincidence. Someone I know was on the same flight for me, ended up being in the same exact hotel room across the hall from me. There are more than 150,000 hotel rooms in Vegas. Wow. Thanks. Shout out to you, Harmon, for the hotel room. Then dinner the night before the Super Bowl. The Purdy's are sitting right next to us. Las Vegas has the most restaurants per capita in the United States. Got a picture with Mr. Purdy. Told me, God bless you. I was fired up. Ran into Tom Brady later that night. Dude had 20. He had 20 Secret Service agents or whatever, 20 bodyguards with him. It seemed like the president. It was very different running into him than Flavor Flav later that night. Feeling good, hanging with Eddie George in Allegiant Stadium before the game. And then the final play in overtime happened, Harmon. It was the seventh longest game in NFL history. It was the third title celebration that I've sat through on the wrong side. Been to 2 Warriors home games where they've lost the final game of the season. Not to mention sitting through that Rams loss in the championship game with my wife in LA a couple years ago, or the Kyle Williams deep into overtime championship loss against the Giants. But don't feel bad for me, man. Other than losing my SF futures bet, I was so lucky to get to go to this game. Burned 6,000 calories just sitting there. Easily the most memorable sports experience of my life. Man, good times. I have brief thoughts in the game, but we can save that till later. What are you going to do? 6 of 7 fumbles recovered by the Chiefs. Had the most win probability added via luck of any playoff team since 2018. Oh, and Mahomes is the absolute GOAT. So, yeah, what a game. Epic. What an experience. Don't feel bad for me. I'm glad I went. It was worth the money, even though it cost me both, the ticket and the Niners loss. So it was a brutal hit there, but it is what it is. A lot of fun.
Man, yeah. Well, I'm glad you're in good spirits. I have not, for the listeners, I have not even texted Dalton or tried to talk to him because as I said to Andy on the pod on Monday, I was like, I just don't know how to talk to people after suffering such a disappointment like that. Especially being there, but I'm glad that you had a great trip. I'm glad that you had a great trip regardless of the outcome of the game. Otherwise, it seemed like a pretty good situation for you, man. So, hey, I'm glad you got to go. I'm glad you got to be there. Glad you had such a great time. For you personally, I wish the outcome of the game was different. But alas, what can you do? Mahomes is inevitable, and that's that.
Yeah, I know. Again, appreciate you helping out with the hotel situation. Vegas was wild, totally worth it. But man, the Niners, this was their time. And it's tough. It's tough to make it this far and then do the whole 5 full quarters too. That game just felt like an eternity for some. I'm sure the first half for people viewing it wasn't great. I heard the halftime show didn't translate as well on TV. I'm not a big Usher guy by any means, but the sound system in that stadium was amazing. The quality, it was a great halftime show, unreal. Yes, and awesome stadium, Allegiant Stadium, probably my new favorite stadium, just given the in and out. I loved SoFi. It's pretty sick in LA, but it's just, you can't beat Vegas, how you can walk to and from Mandalay Bay and or Luxor. So crazy. I assume it'll be back in 4 years from now. The next three Super Bowls are locked in, but I'd be surprised if Vegas isn't the fourth because it didn't even feel overwhelmed. They have enough restaurants for people to get in and whatnot. So it was a cool experience. And thanks again for hooking me up with the hotel.
Yeah, I didn't go to the game, but Allegiant was a great stadium to go to, even just for opening night and just to walk around and stuff like that. It's a beautiful stadium for sure. So I'm sure the game there, the halftime show was electric. But yeah, man, like I said, wish for you it was a different result. But we'll talk about the Niners and what they can do going forward because we have a lot of stuff to talk about here on today's show, Dalton. We're going to break down 32 fantasy questions as we head into the offseason. It's essentially going to kind of serve as our offseason preview here. We're going to hit on one overarching question that every team faces from an offensive standpoint as they head into this season. We're going to sort of try to use it again as a table setter for these teams. So we'll be talking about the Niners and the Chiefs much, much later in the show, obviously, because those are the last two picks. Because we're going to do this just like Stat Nerd, buddy, where we go from the first pick to the 32nd pick. So we'll talk about your Niners and Chiefs much later here. But all that makes sense. I think this is going to serve as a good like table setter for the offseason. I love these kind of shows.
Oh, yeah, I'm fired up. Let's do it.
All right, so first one here. It feels good to be able to say first team up, the first overall pick, Carolina Panthers. It feels just like we're doing a Stat Nerd show back in the regular season. But we start with the Carolina Panthers, who, of course, do not have their first-round pick. And our question here for the Panthers, Dalton, is very simple. Is Bryce Young salvageable? So I think if you get the sense of how this show is going to go, we're not going to sit here and tell you, like, we have the answer for this question. This is just basically how this team, where it all kind of starts, like the foundation point for each of these teams. And that does start with, can this team salvage Bryce Young? And I think it's going to be a tough task, man. I don't know where you stand on Bryce Young after this year. Obviously, even just taking the Bryce Young part out of it, it's a whole new coaching staff. I like Dave Canales. I like a lot of what he's done, obviously working with Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield the last 2 years. I like a lot of the substance of that Tampa Bay offense last year, but that's still, again, a tall task for a first-time head coach who's going to juggle the offensive play calling, and it's obviously a skill position group that needs to be pretty much completely remade.
It's still wild to me that the Panthers never held a fourth quarter lead in any game this season in regulation at any point. Bryce Young, if you look at really nerdy stat here by football perspective, adjusted net yards per attempt plus, Bryce Young just had the fourth worst rookie season in NFL history behind. But some of the names did bounce back here, though, Harmon. So the worst ever is Jared Goff. Then next to are Ryan Leaf, Josh Rosen, then Bryce Young, then Deshaun Kaiser. But then Donovan McNabb is also on that list too. So it doesn't necessarily mean you are totally buried and you can't bounce back. But it does show it was a historically bad rookie season for Bryce Young. And at this point, it looks like a long shot that he'll be a viable starter throughout his career. But it is possible. Do you have any optimism? I mean, this is an offense to avoid in fantasy next season, and it looks like one of the worst situations in the league.
Yeah, I think the Goff model has to be what the Panthers are looking at here, which is obviously Jared Goff had a disaster rookie season under Jeff Fisher with the LA Rams in 2016. Jeff Fisher gets fired. They bring in Sean McVay. They have to hope that Dave Canales is their Sean McVay, and they have to make some kind of shrewd moves to refurbish the players around Bryce Young, just like the Rams did with Jared Goff back in 2017. You think about who they added in free agency. They added Robert Woods. Remember, people made fun of that contract at the time, but he ended up being a rock-solid player for them throughout the duration of his time there in the LA with the LA Rams. They also drafted Cooper Kupp in the third round that year. So they have to get, and like you could say that the Panthers made those kind of moves last year when they signed Adam Thielen. They drafted Jonathan Mingo, but I don't love the way they used Jonathan Mingo last year. He's not a guy that's going to ever be an outside the numbers player. That was not the role that I liked him to play coming into the league. So can they do something with Mingo, or is he a lost cause? Is Thielen going to return to just that volume sponge role? I don't think that's great for the offense if so. So are they going to make some of those type of moves around Bryce Young, I think, is the question. Also worth noting, too, that those Rams teams had a good player in Todd Gurley who was dragged down by a bad offense in 2016. But obviously McVay got the best out of him. The Carolina Panthers do not have a player like that on the roster. So it's not a clean one-to-one. That's the path forward. But I think that has to be something of the model here for them.
Yeah, Mingo was bad. In fairness to Bryce Young, his receiving core definitely was one of the weakest in the league. But they have a lot of improvements to make this offseason. And there's a reason we're talking about this team first.
Well, at least they can't pass protect. So there is that. They don't have any good receivers and they can't pass protect. Yeah, that's another thing, too. They signed Andrew Whitworth, did those early Sean McVay Rams teams, and that ended up being a huge catalyst for them. So maybe that's an area that the Panthers look for. Though they're not necessarily like flush with resources, obviously, in the draft. So that is going to be an area where they have to maybe try to get some guys on the veteran free agency market to come to Carolina, but it's going to be a tough sell to some of those veterans that they try to talk to. Let's move on here. Second overall team, Washington Commanders. This question is simple. Who is playing quarterback for this team? Because as we've seen, even if we like some of the players on this roster, if they don't get the quarterback position right, they're not going to do anything. They hire Cliff Kingsbury as the offensive coordinator. We're going to do a full coaching preview podcast next week with the Ringers Ben Solak. So definitely check out that next week. So we'll kind of break into the schemes and where some players might fit on that podcast. But obviously, again, this all comes down to who are they going to have at quarterback, which most likely it's going to be somebody that they take at the second overall pick.
Give Solek some Purdy love from me. I've seen the Cliff Kingsbury hiring linked, meaning USC connection for Caleb Williams. Maybe they trade up, but also I guess Drake May ran an air raid, exactly the Kingsbury system there. So that could mean either thing there. But either way, I just expect Washington's going to take a QB at number 2, and I don't have a strong opinion among any of the three. I was sold on Caleb Williams a year ago, but now I'm open to the idea that any three of these guys could be the best quarterback in this class. So yeah, it's going to boost McLaurin's fantasy value because I mean, even when Hal was putting up fantasy stats, by the way, I think he's the first. Ian Hartitz, I think, tweeted it. He's the first since Jameis Winston with like 30 touchdowns and 30 turnover-worthy plays. So a very epic season from Hal. But his target rate was way down to McLaurin, even when he was putting up the fantasy stats. So McLaurin gets I know rookie QB doesn't sound great, but compared to his career QBs he's dealt with, could be a massive upgrade for him. And Dotson's target rate is bottom of the barrel low. Like we're talking his comp. I know we liked him, but man, he does not command targets. So McLaurin, this could be great, big news if May and Williams are immediate upgrades as, you know, from a passing perspective. And another guy I have my eye on, he just looks like a really good player with a lot of upside, is Brian Robinson. I think he's just a good football player. And if they upgrade at quarterback here, if and when they upgrade at quarterback here, he'll benefit.
Yeah, I always liked Cliff Kingsbury's run games with the Arizona Cardinals. Some of that is just like you're working off Kyler Murray. You're going to naturally have some better run games, but they got the best out of some running backs there, and they also hired Anthony Lynn from the San Francisco 49ers to be the running backs coach, run game coordinator. So I do think that while we're going to talk a lot about these receivers and these pass catchers, if the offense is better, Brian Robinson might be a guy that really benefits from that. So that's a good call out from you, Dalton. Yeah, I like Drake May. I think he's the guy that I would probably want at that second overall pick if Caleb Williams does go number 1, which is what I'm expecting to happen. This all would have been a lot sexier if they hired Ben Johnson, of course, but still, even in Cliff's offense, if they get the quarterback right, I am ready to go back to the well with Terry McLaurin. I'm ready to go back to the well with Jahan Dotson, just not like, I don't think he's a guy that's ever going to be a number 1 receiver. I don't think that was ever going to be the case. But he can be a good, solid football player that I think can have some better peripheral metrics in a good offense with a good quarterback than what we've seen the first 2 years of his career.
And as producer Colin notes, the Commanders also have $73 million in cap space this offseason, so they can make some moves.
Definitely a team that needs to also remake their defense and their offensive line as well. Let's go to the third overall team here, New England Patriots. Question here is, are we looking at a full-scale makeover for this team on the offensive side of the football? Alex Van Pelt is the offensive coordinator. Bill O'Brien's now the head coach at Boston College. I'm just curious if they're like, under a new regime, new-ish, obviously Gerard Mayo is in the building, where is this team going to go on offense? I would imagine that like Pop Douglas has a role on this team. I would imagine that Ramondre Stevenson can have a role on this team. But other than that, this feels very blank slate-ish to me, Dalton. How do you feel about the talk that they might trade out of the third overall pick? That seems to be a popular talking point among Raiders fans, among, Vikings fans. Other people want to trade up to that third pick, and that the Patriots might even be entertaining that.
I mean, I don't follow college closely, but my outsider perspective is why. I mean, they need a quarterback as much as any team in the league. Bailey Zappi's watching film in the wide receiver room because it's so toxic in there with Mac Jones. Jaden Daniels is number 1 on some people's boards who follow college football for a living. So I don't see why they wouldn't take him number 3 here. So that's my thoughts on that. But again, if you're not sold on the guy and you can get a huge haul, I mean, the Niners gave up 10 first rounders. It feels like move up from 12 to 3 for Lance, and Daniels is probably a better prospect. I'm certainly more on tape. So yeah, I could see either side here. But if I'm the Patriots or if I'm a Patriots fan, just try to draft a franchise quarterback here. If there's 3 options and you have pick number 3, do it.
Yeah, I don't see what other direction are they going in. Like what veteran quarterback are you targeting? Like what real solution are you targeting? Because yeah, Bailey Zappi is not a solution. Obviously, Mac Jones is out of there at this point. And again, you still got a lot of you got a lot of work to do around the quarterback, but you still got to start somewhere. I imagine that we are looking at a full-scale makeover here, and I feel like that has to include a quarterback at the 3rd overall pick. And like, regardless of your evaluation with Jaden Daniels, it's similar to Anthony Richardson last year, where we're going to talk about, well, this, that, and the other. And then by the time we get to April, he's a top 4, top 3 pick in the draft. Again, exactly what happened with Richardson last year.
Yep. That's going to be this is going to be a fun draft, man, with all these skill positions players at the top 4 likely going. I mean, it's definitely going to be an exciting one to watch.
Speaking of which, 4th overall team, Arizona Cardinals. What does the wide receiver room look like? That's our question here for the Cardinals, because I think that receiver room was a very limiting kind of weight on the offense last year. I think it was a weight on Kyler Murray overall. We know that Murray's back as the starting quarterback. I think that they did some good things schematically on offense, and I kind of like some of the pieces here. We like Trey McBride. I like Michael Wilson, but it feels like they need an alpha dog in that wide receiver room, and obviously they can, here at the 4th overall pick, take Marvin Harrison. Maybe they take a Malik Neighbors or a Roma Dunze. I don't think so. I think Harrison's going to be the top receiver pick in the draft for a lot of different reasons, a lot of good reasons. I think the guy's a great prospect just on what I've seen so far. It started my college prep a little earlier this year just because this receiver class is so good. So I think that's really my big question is, what does the receiver room look like? Because I think that has to be addressed in order for the offense to take another step.
Yeah, 100%. Marquise Brown is an unrestricted free agent. Greg Dortch is an unrestricted free agent. So on one hand, the Cardinals ranked behind only the Falcons in pass rate over expectation last year, or bottom 10s in points scored during Jonathan Gannon's first year in Arizona. On the other hand, Kyler Murray didn't return until midseason. They were one of the fastest paces, and their offense was one of the fastest paces. So that's good news for fantasy managers. The key here is just Marvin Harrison. He is the favorite to go number 4 in Arizona. He'd make Trey McBride more like the tight end 3 or 4 as opposed to an argument for number 1, if he goes there. And Harrison's early ADP is the highest ever from a rookie wide receiver by like 2 rounds or something. It's like 2 rounds earlier than Chase.
I saw that on one of the other sites that does best ball drafts already right now. The sickos are taking him like as wide receiver 11, wide receiver 12-ish. That is pretty wild, man.
It's aggressive, but his college resume is ridiculous. And boy, he would be an alpha right away in Arizona. He'll be leading targets with Hollywood Brown likely gone too. So, and Kyler Murray another year removed from knee surgery. So yeah, Arizona, this is looks like a very different wide receiver core next year. And then Trey McBride could be even better. So it's a good setup at the fast pace. Harrison, Murray, and McBride. Connor probably will return to the cheapest contract. If the games he's healthy, he'll be a fantasy monster. So, for a team picking this early in the draft, they have an awful lot of nice fantasy components, assuming Harrison ends up there. I'd love if he doesn't, as a Niner fan, man. I mean, Harrison's going to be a nightmare for the next decade in that division.
I will just share this note because, like I said, I've started my prospect prep a little bit earlier this year than I normally do in terms of charting the games. So I've got 3 games in of Marvin Harrison so far. So the metrics and reception perception wise, they're not necessarily, that's not going to be indicative of over a full sample. But if the 3-game success rate versus press I charted for Marvin Harrison holds up, it would clear the highest I've charted of the last 4 draft classes by a lot. Like, it would lead that class by a lot. And there's been obviously a lot of great wideouts that have come into the league the last 4 years. So you can imagine what an exceptional profile we're potentially looking at here with Marvin Harrison.
And I heard someone, I think he said he was half thinking this through, but it was like Garrett Wilson and JSN, their profiles look slightly different, realizing how good CJ Stroud was, catching balls from him, whereas Harrison just did it without him for a year, right? So, and nice to hear you say that as well. So maybe he does reach the hype, but that is wild to be drafted as a top 12 fantasy wideout immediately.
Yeah, we typically see that happen at the running back position. Those guys get vaulted up right away. Speaking of running backs, 5th overall team here, the LA Chargers. My question for the Chargers is, are we looking at a complete blank slate around Justin Herbert? And think about it this way. Austin Eckler, we talked with him obviously on the pod. He says he's not burning any bridges. No bridges are burned. He could be open to returning to the Chargers if there was interest there. My gut still tells me he's probably not playing for the Chargers next year. So looking at a new starting running back with the Chargers, we absolutely have to be looking at a blank slate, the tight end room. Like Greg Roman hired as the offensive coordinator. That's going to be a tight end focused offense. And Gerald Everett and Donald Parham do not fit in that group. So potentially looking at new tight ends there. Wide receiver room. I don't think they're going to be married to Mike Williams. I think is definitely going to be cut. I don't think they're married to guys like Josh Palmer, Quentin Johnston. Definitely they're not married to him. Maybe we'll see if he can develop, but Keenan Allen, is he a guy they look to trade or maybe move on from his salary? I think he's the one I'm thinking most likely stays with the team, but still that's a lot of open spots here on an offense where we like the head coach that they hired. We like the quarterback, of course. So there's a lot of potential fantasy pieces that could be in flux around Justin Herbert. And I'm not convinced that they take, in the 5th pick of the draft, that they take one of these receivers because they desperately need some offensive line help as well.
Yeah, Harbaugh didn't land with the most loaded roster. You're right, a lot of questions here, but he did land in one with maybe an answer at the most important position, and I'm sure he's sold on Herbert. Harbaugh recently came out and said Eckler's a great back, and I hope he comes back. Maybe it's coach speak, who knows? But it definitely left open the door. He went out of his way emphatically. He's like, we want him back. And obviously the alternatives behind him aren't anything special. So yeah, there's a lot of questions to be answered in Los Angeles this offseason. It'll be fun to see Harbaugh coach again in the league. And yeah, I mean, it's just all revolves around Herbert. And if it's Allen without Mike Williams, and you're not a biggest fan of Palmer, and Quentin Johnston looks like a possible bust. So even at Allen's age, imagine if no Eckler, Allen could just be a target absolute monster given the way that roster shakes out. I mean, if Mike Williams is gone, especially.
Next team up, New York Giants. Where exactly do we stand on the Brian Daboll / Mike Kafka brain trust is my question for this team, because I think they're also looking at a pretty big skill position player makeover here. Barkley might be probably moving on. I don't think they can rely on Darren Waller after what they got this past year. They're definitely going to be adding some receivers, you'd have to imagine, this season. There's a lot of things in flux there. We don't know what's going to happen at quarterback. I got some funny Daniel Jones stuff to tell you actually after the pod is over, based on Vegas. But I'll leave that for the behind the scenes show between Dalton and I. But Daniel Jones coming back from injury. And honestly, should we care about any of this, Dalton? Because I don't know where I stand with Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka. Coming off their first year, I was so impressed with the job they did. Not so impressed with what we got in 23.
Yeah. Barkley could end up elsewhere. Their quarterback's really going to go back to Daniel Jones. They're locked in there. And just a receiving group just full of similar type players with no one emerging. Even Wan'Dale Robinson's more of a PPR lower floor guy. So yeah, I don't know. This is the big question here is, where does Barkley end up?
Yeah, and I don't think he's back with this team. That's my guess. I would love him in Houston. I think that would be a great fit. But I think he probably is playing elsewhere next season. Next team up here, another team that's moving on from their starting running back, most likely, Tennessee Titans. Our question here is Will Levis it? Is he a guy that can elevate this offense with Brian Callahan as the head coach? And, I think Hopkins is probably back with the Titans this year, would be my guess. But not a lot of other pieces that we're potentially excited about there beyond Tajay Spears. And of course, with Spears, we want him to be tethered to a good offense, good quarterback. So that's why the Will Levis question is the biggest one hanging over this team.
Yeah, and I don't have a take on Levis either way. I guess at this point, it's probably a long shot that he becomes a star, but he's definitely going to be given the chance this year. Titans are going to look very different. No Derrick Henry, no Ryan Tannehill, no Vrabel. Spears, I'm going to be bullish on. He looks like a
of course,
really exciting player. He's young and he's not built for 300 plus touches, but yeah, that dude's going to be a fantasy difference maker given an expanded role. Sure sounds like Henry wants to land in a Super Bowl contending situation. My other question about Tennessee is their new coach, Brian Callahan, never called plays throughout his 5 seasons as offensive coordinator in Cincinnati. So to me, that's a bit of a wild card. Now he's just, they hired a guy who wasn't even a play caller, and now he's going to be calling plays and taking over a head coaching position. So obviously expectations aren't super high in Tennessee, but still, to me, that was an interesting hire.
Yeah, and we've seen other non-play calling coaches go on to be good play callers elsewhere. Mike McDaniel, Sean McVay come to mind, guys that weren't calling plays previously that ended up being great head coaches and great play callers at the same time. So I don't think that like makes him any better or worse a hire. I think it's just we'll see how he ends up filling in the job. I think it was pretty critical that he did indeed get his dad, Bill Callahan, to leave the Browns to come coach the offensive line there. That's going to be a big one because the Tennessee Titans offensive line has been a mess the last few years, and Callahan is a proven offensive line coach, offensive line mind, so I think that's going to be critical for this Titans team. Let's move on to the Falcons here. Next one up, and again, very simple question. What's the plan at quarterback? Because we've got to be sold on the plan at quarterback here because man, I'm jacked up about the Falcons offense again, Dalton. I think Zach Robinson coming from the Rams with Raheem Morris could be just what this offense needs. Talking to Bijan Robinson at Radio Row in Las Vegas, he is super excited about this staff. He's very, very bullish on Raheem Morris. He's very, very bullish on Zach Robinson. And by all accounts, the public comments from both Morris and Robinson, this coaching staff is very jacked up about him. They're very jacked up about Drake London. They think that maybe they can get more out of Kyle Pitts than what we've seen in the NFL so far. So I'm ready to believe in the Falcons offense again if we get a legit quarterback in here, whether it is a rookie who's probably outside those top three guys, or I don't know, is it a veteran on the open market? That's kind of where it gets a little hairy here. I don't know. I'm interested to see what their plan of quarterback is because I do want to be drafting these Falcons pieces again, but I'm not doing it if it's a Desmond Ridder type of quarterback. It's not going to be Ridder, but like even that tier of quarterback.
So yeah, going over the quotes with Raheem Morris and Zach Robinson, it sounds like they're moving on from Ridder, or that could just be the Twitter community hoping that's what they mean by these vague quotes. I'm not totally sure there, but the problem here is what are the alternatives? Yeah, because where they pick in the draft and what veterans are available. But whomever it is, I assume they're moving on and they will utilize these skill position players as fantasy managers want them to. Pitts will be a whole further year removed from that knee surgery that was clearly more serious than people were led to believe. And then Bijan Robinson obviously going to be drafted in the first round, regardless who plays quarterback. But yeah, let's get a quarterback in there who doesn't turn the ball over like crazy in the red zone. I mean, Ridder was just so loose with the ball, and Heineke was one of the most off-target QBs too. So they need an upgrade at the most important position.
Big time need an upgrade there. So yeah, I'm interested to see what they come up with. Could they be a team that's in the Justin Fields sweepstakes? That transitions us very nicely to the next team here, Chicago Bears. Our question for the Bears is, how much does a new quarterback move the needle for DJ Moore? I don't care about the Bears culture war on Twitter about Justin Fields. Like, I think they're moving on. I think they're taking a new quarterback at the first overall pick, almost regardless of their evaluation of Fields, because I think even the biggest Fields fans would have to admit that he's not like a slam dunk surefire starter. You're hoping that you surround him with better pieces and in a better offensive ecosystem, he could be a good starter. But when you have the opportunity to reset the quarterback clock, all that stuff, the new a new contract, a prospect in Caleb Williams that most people seem sold on, I think that's the direction they're going on here. So it's going to be a new quarterback. So for us in fantasy, Dalton, I don't know. Justin Fields was great for DJ Moore in fantasy last year. How much does a new quarterback, a rookie quarterback, potentially move that needle for DJ Moore?
Yeah, I mean, Fields provides us fantasy value with his legs, and we get a Williams. Maybe there's an upgrade as a passer, even though he's a rookie for Moore. But I mean, if I have Moore in Dynasty, I'd prefer just Fields stand pat. I mean, he was like I think he might have even been behind only Tyreek Hill for a great stretch when they were on the field together as a number 2 fantasy receiver last year. So I mean, he was just targeting Moore like crazy. Not sure where the numbers ended up, but the splits were dramatic when Fields was QB. So yeah, I would say it's bad news, or not the best news, but your consolation prize is this possible generational talent and Caleb Williams throwing him the football. So I think DJ Moore is going to be fine. And but yeah, when you're choosing between maybe Nico Collins in round 2, now losing Fields, maybe I'd rather Collins. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a pretty big debate because Moore was so good. How much of that was Fields? How much of that was just like DJ Moore can be good with any quarterback, but he reached a higher ceiling in Chicago than he ever did in Carolina. But I think that Caleb Williams, even if he's not a slam dunk prospect or anything, I don't really know that any prospect is slam dunk at this point. We probably need to ditch the generational term.
Mm-hmm.
There's risk with everybody. I still think that he presents probably a better path to anything that TJ Moore had previously played with anyway. So I think it's a win-win situation for Moore.
Fair.
All right, next team up here, New York Jets. The question, Aaron Rodgers is back, but surely his merry band of men isn't coming back with him, right? Obviously, talked to Sauce Gardner, another guy I spoke with at Radio Row. Asked him about, like, hey, buddy, you're out there, recruiting T. Higgins and Calvin Ridley. Like, give me the scouting report on those guys. And, he was very forthright about that. I think Sauce Gardner is talking about that because we all don't think that Alan Lazard and Randall Cobb are lining up and taking big snaps for the Jets. Hypothetically, I don't know that they're going to bring in T. Higgins and Calvin Ridley or even one of those guys necessarily, but you have to imagine there are different players lining up for this Jets offense around Garrett Wilson. So we assume Rodgers is back and he's back healthy. That's obviously what we're all hoping for if we care about Garrett Wilson's production. But does the addition of new receivers potentially move the needle here for Wilson in a negative way, along with Rodgers coming back, moving it in a positive way?
Yeah, it's something to pay attention to see what the targets Wilson is competing with. Hopefully New York addresses its offensive line as well. Rodgers will be the big story here. Breece Hall, though, just finished the top 5 fantasy back despite seeing limited snaps of the first month of the season, recovering from knee surgery, played for a bottom 5 offense. I think there's an argument for him to be the first overall pick, given running back position and McCaffrey's career trajectory. I mean, it's just looking at age. I know he won't go there, but he's going to be the second back off most boards and maybe behind 3 or 4 receivers. But Breece Hall is my favorite player to draft in 2024.
You've been calling that since the end of 22 that he was going to be the number one overall.
It wasn't a smooth ride there, but yeah. We
got there.
We got there.
But we got there. That's what counts. All right, next team up here, Minnesota Vikings. Simple question for them. Can they bring back Kirk Cousins? I saw a report that Justin Jefferson allegedly wants to know the plan at quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings before signing a big fat contract extension this offseason. I think he probably is going to sign a big fat contract extension with the Minnesota Vikings this offseason and all will be fine. But I'm sure that he is curious what the plan is at quarterback for this team, because I'm also curious. Is Kirk Cousins going to be able to come back? Like, are they going to be able to get Kirk Cousins to come back and not hit the open market? Because, man, I'll tell you, with all these teams, we're like, hey, quarterback. He hits the open market, somebody's going to give him an awful lot of money, regardless of the fact that he's coming off an Achilles tear. And at his current age, he could command a pretty big market. Can Minnesota just assuage him not to hit the market and just return to a place he already knows and loves?
Yeah, maybe I'm way off base here and you can freezing cold take me here, but this to me is the lock of the offseason. Cousins returning to Minnesota. He says he's been blessed with the amount of money that his family could ever use. He wants to finish the job there. I believe the coaching staff loves him. They were great with him or they had the potential to be. They beat my Niners, when Cousins was healthy last year. I think it's a lock. Cousins returns to Minnesota. I would be shocked if this doesn't happen. And by the way, he's dancing. The MVP, whatever the award ceremony. I don't know if you saw it. You may have been in Vegas already, but he was like dancing up there. So it looks like his recovery from Achilles surgery is going well.
I hope you're right, man. And I tend to agree with you that I think he is back in Minnesota. I just can't get out of my mind that, again, all of these teams that need quarterbacks, all of these teams that run a derivative of the offense that he's played in for so long. The Shanahan system, of course. I'm definitely just thinking he could end up getting a lot of money thrown at him where his agent is just like, we got to go take this offer. It's your last contract, whatever. But overall, I'm with you. I think he stays in Minnesota, and that would be best for basically everybody involved. Next team up here, Denver Broncos, one of those teams that I have no idea what they're going to do at quarterback. My question here is just like, what's Sean Payton's real vision for this offense? Because some of those blank slate teams that we talked about up at the top from a skill position standpoint, the Broncos feel a little blank slate-ish to me here. Other than Cortland Sutton, I expect to be back and have a pretty big role with this team. But other than that, man, I mean, quarterback's open. I think running back is sneaky open. Although Javonte Williams is fine and they like Jaleel McLaughlin. And the receiver room is pretty wide open as well.
I want to circle back to Minnesota quarterback room real quick. Jaron Hall costs more against the salary cap than Brock Purdy did to the 49ers this season, just so we're clear. We're talking about valuable players. Denver has a messed up quarterback situation, man. It's Russell Wilson's gone. Jarrett Stidham, I don't know, is the answer. Hopefully Javonte Williams just looks like a new back, a full other year returning from multi-ligament surgery. Cortland Sutton certainly looked like a new player, a full other year removed from his knee surgery last year. But yeah, I'm beginning to think you may have been right on Jerry Jeudy. Beginning to think that you might have been slightly onto something there about him being overvalued. But this is a weird situation. Peyton, I don't know. This is a rebuild mode that could take a few years here. This is a long-term outlook.
Yeah, I think it's a long-term outlook too. And they could be that team that rolls into the season with like a very weird-looking quarterback room. And again, I'm just wondering if we don't see Sean Payton's vision for the offense this year, because I don't think whatever it was last year, it was very like, let's keep Russell Wilson on the tracks and like, let's not have him. That was how they coached. They did not trust Russell Wilson. And I think that obviously the way things played out there, we can all understand what was really going on from between coaching staff and quarterback. When are we going to see it if we don't see it this year? Because we're going to get years into the Sean Payton regime and not have a good idea yet. Let's stay in the AFC West here. Las Vegas Raiders. My question for this team is, are we teetering on the edge of exciting and uninspiring here? Because they have some players that you would legitimately want to get really excited about. Like Devontae Adams, exciting. The whole team was excited to retain Antonio Pierce, right? Max Crosby really swung his power around and made sure they hired Antonio Pierce. They got what they wanted. I like Jacoby Myers. They obviously want to establish a run game. I would call the Luke Getsy hire at offensive coordinator very uninspiring. I think the quarterback decision could end up being, oh, wow, really interesting. We get an exciting young prospect with Devontae Adams to lean on. Or are we looking at like they're going to try to sell us on Aiden O'Connell for a few months here? That would be uninspiring. So that we're sort of teetering in between like two worlds here with this Raiders offense.
On one hand, I understand why the Raiders hired Pierce, given what just happened. They had an incumbent come in, and then McDaniels got the big contract and went out to the box, and obviously it was a disaster. And Max Crosby and this locker room wants him. That said, this type of coaching philosophy typically doesn't work well in the NFL long term. Another team with a glaring question mark at quarterback. And maybe the best argument against my guy Purdy would be pointing to Jimmy Garoppolo literally getting benched to Aiden O'Connell last year, and like no one even blinked. The dude was benched healthy. He wasn't even a thought of returning, and he's had this gigantic contract. So yeah, I don't know if AOC's
dude. I was walking through. I don't know if I'm sure you did it at one point too when you went into Vegas, but I was walking through that like mall between the Luxor and Mandalay Bay down in Vegas, and at one point they have like a Raiders team store in there. They have all the jerseys right in front. There was just a ton of Garoppolo jerseys. And I was like, oh yeah, that's right. Like that happened this year. Like Jimmy Garoppolo played for the Raiders. It feels like because you're right. They just benched him. Basically like threw him in a broom closet, and we're just like, we're starting Aiden O'Connell the rest of the season. Like that, just Josh McDaniels reminder is not taking the field for a quarterback for us the rest of the year. So seeing that jersey, I was almost just like, oh, yeah, that's right. Like that happened.
Yeah, people love a good quarterback controversy, but no one even blinked. Like, Garoppolo's done, he's done.
Like,
and no one even said it.
Of
course, Aiden O'Connell. The guy looked good in 2 quarters in the preseason. Of course. It's AOC. It's just, But the Raiders, they do have an awesome home stadium. And Mike Mayer showed flashes there.
Yeah,
this is the team that needs to, another one that needs to address the most important position on the field.
These teams here that we're talking about, Raiders, Broncos, Falcons, Vikings, if they don't retain Kirk Cousins, like these teams that aren't in the top 3 of the draft that are in position to take those players, it's worth remembering. Colin brings it up in the chat. Daniel Jeremiah mentioned the other day that teams are going to get wild reaching for quarterbacks in this draft because next year's class is supposedly not very good. And we never say that, right? We always say like, oh, next year's class is going to be even better than this year. Well, apparently No, it's not. There's not a lot of promising quarterbacks in college football at this point right now that are clear first round picks for next year. Like we all knew Caleb and May would be quarterbacks that we're going to be taking in the first round this time last year. So watch out for these teams like making a big. People are talking about JJ McCarthy, getting you excited about JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix, the guys like that. They might be players in the first round to these type of teams if they don't land some kind of solution on the veteran market, which I don't see a lot of those solutions hanging around too.
Yeah, no great running back prospects in this draft, but 5-6 quarterbacks could go. Bauer's best tight end prospect ever, and loaded at the top of wide receivers. So really fun stuff for fantasy.
All right, next team up here, New Orleans Saints. Question for this one, is a scheme change enough to get us interested in this offense again? Because they fired Pete Carmichael, moved on from him after a long time with the team. He predictably took a role with Sean Payton's Denver Broncos staff. A lot of connective tissue there. And they hired Clint Kubiak from your 49ers to be the 49ers passing game coordinator, to be the offensive coordinator here. He has history as a play caller. He obviously comes, again, from this Shanahan Kubiak. Literally, his name is Kubiak. Comes from that type of tree, that type of philosophy. Is that change enough that we could be looking at a better offense in New Orleans? Because it's going to be a lot of the same players there next year. Michael Thomas is out, but they might have A.T. Perry step up. They got Rashid Shaheed, Chris Olave, and again, Derek Carr is going to be the quarterback again this year. So the Derek Carr part of it's pretty but a scheme change, is that enough to get us excited about this offense?
Not for me with Carr still there. Olave, great player. Kendre Miller, an interesting sleeper for sure. But yeah, Carr just gets in the red zone, worries more about not throwing picks. It's just, I don't know. It's just not great for fantasy or for the Saints, but he's definitely locked in there. I hope Winston returns to New Orleans. Loved watching his interview, the Mardi Gras interview there. He's awesome, man. I actually hope to get to see him play more too. But New Orleans is, I don't know. This, maybe you tell me if the scheme gonna dramatically change the way Carr plays. But to me, it's just more of the same, probably.
Yeah, I think probably a little bit more of the same. Definitely, I think some infusion of new ideas is necessary there in New Orleans. Like I said, Pete Carmichael had been on that job as the offensive coordinator for a long time. So I think some new ideas there are good, but not enough to move the needle so much that I'd be going out of my way to draft Saints players is kind of my gut instinct there. Beyond Olave, who I think is just a really good player. All right, next team up here, Indianapolis Colts. Question for them. How will Anthony Richardson perform coming off injury? It's easy to forget about Anthony Richardson because he played so little as a rookie, but man, a lot of good players here on this offense, a lot of players that could be fantasy viable if Anthony Richardson, who would obviously be fantasy viable himself, can return from a big-time shoulder injury.
Yeah, Breece Hall is my favorite first-round target. Anthony Richardson's my favorite overall fantasy target next year. He was leading the all-fantasy quarterbacks in fantasy points per dropback by a mile. That's the best future indicator for fantasy production. Steichen has him as his coach, not only playing indoors, fast pace, but Steichen had the Colts averaging more points per game than the Super Bowl champion Chiefs last year, losing his rookie quarterback in week 5 with Minshew. Minshew is an unrestricted free agent, by the way. So is Zach Moss. So is Michael Pittman. I fully expect them to bring Pittman back, but Moss might have played himself into a nicer contract elsewhere. Yeah, Jonathan Taylor should get drafted as a top 12 overall pick regardless. And Anthony Richardson will not be drafted, or at least early trends suggest will not be drafted as a top 5 fantasy QB, but will certainly finish as such. I'd probably finish as number 1 if he stays healthy. He's just made for fantasy point. The guy he's just made to produce fantasy points. What his style of play and put in a perfect situation with nice Josh Downs. I mean, come on, let's go. Assuming Pittman resigns, which I would be shocked if he doesn't.
I would be shocked if Pittman plays anywhere else other than Indianapolis this coming season. Even if they can't reach a long-term deal, I think he'd be franchise tagged and they'd try to negotiate it out with him. They love Pittman. They're very excited about him. And yeah, I mean, why would he not want to stay there? He and Anthony Richardson seem to have a good connection. And I definitely think that this is a big discourse on like Michael Pittman stuff this offseason is, was Gardner Minshew the reason Pittman broke out last? I refuse to acknowledge any argument that like Minshew was anything but like a neutral to net negative thing for that offense last year. I mean, if you really watch those games, Minshew is not a good quarterback. And there was no fundamental difference other than some more design runs, of course, but not an overwhelming amount of design runs. There was no fundamental difference between the plays that were called for Anthony Richardson and the plays that were called for Gardner Minshew. Like, they were running a lot of RPOs with Gardner Minshew in there. And I mean, you're not going to have the same level of rushing threat there. That's number one. But a lot of those like quick hitting passes, that was the same stuff that Anthony Richardson was having dialed up for him as what they did for Gardner Minshew all offseason. So, yeah, that narrative can be shot into the sun. I do wonder if we see Minshew in a starting job, though, next year as like a bridge quarterback or something like that with one of these teams that we talked about earlier.
The one thing we could hope for as fantasy managers with Pittman is a little more increased usage in the red zone. Touchdowns haven't been there. And he's built for it, too. So
downfield, too. I'd like to see more,
I know it's all the short slants. Sure. Yeah. Okay. A couple things there, but there's room for improvement. But the targets you love to see, and Richardson can, of course, improve as a passer, the more he plays in the league, too. So by the end of this year, I think, you're not going to be pining for the Gardner Minshew days.
Next team up here, Seattle Seahawks. Question for them. Do we have the same players, but a different scheme basically here for the Seattle Seahawks? This is actually one of the offensive coordinators Ryan Grubb from Washington. I believe I'm getting that right. Was the offensive coordinator hire here. He's one of the guys I'm most interested to pick Ben Solak's brain on next week, just because I don't know much about this offense other than charting Rome Odunze. I'm curious to see what this offense might look like, because I do think we get a lot of the same players back here. Actually, as we're recording this, Adam Schefter reported that Seattle's going to pay the $12.7 million guaranteed for Geno that was due this Friday. I saw a report here, like breaking news graphic. Yeah, Geno. Yeah, they're bringing back Geno. Like, Geno was good last year, but look at this quarterback market we're talking about. Schefter, calm down, reporting this is like I guess it's a big piece of breaking news, but what the hell else are they going to do, the Seattle Seahawks, other than bring Geno back? So it's probably a lot of the same players, and is an offensive coordinator change. I don't even think Shane Waldron was that like a bad coordinator, but is a new scheme enough to inject some life here that maybe these guys who are all other than Kenneth Walker, maybe like slight fantasy disappointments last year, can that breathe some new life into this offense in 2023? Or excuse me, in 2024.
Geno had a flexible contract. There was a new head coach. So there was talk about him being a possible long shot cut candidate. But Drew Lock's also an unrestricted free agent. And this ends any speculation there with Geno, who, regressed some last season as the offense took a step back, despite adding JSN. Though he did look a little bit better toward the end of the season, and it must remember that he did start the season off with that broken wrist toward the end of the preseason. The thing here for me is new offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb. Hayden Winks shot out a tweet saying that he just slung it with the Huskies, his pass rate and his deep pass rate, both in the upper tiers. So if that means anything, maybe there's some hope that this offense with Metcalf, Lockett, and JSN, who all disappointed their ADPs last year, can rebound.
Lockett, I wouldn't say a lock to be back with this team next year. I have a tough time picturing him in another uniform. Got a burgeoning real estate career there in Seattle too. So we'll see. I don't know. I just wonder if he's back with the team. It's probably, they don't benefit a ton from a salary cap standpoint by cutting him, but again, I just think that's an interesting one to keep an eye on. Obviously, I love Tyler Lockett, but I'm ready to see more JSN usage than what we got last year from a deployment perspective. That's for sure. A lot of potential in this offense, a lot of unrealized potential last year. So I'm curious if a scheme change here is going to be enough to juice it up. All right, next team up here, Jacksonville Jaguars. Question for them: what does Pass Catcher Remake version 3.0 look like for this team? Because that's where we're headed. Like, we had the group that Trevor Lawrence was playing with as a rookie. That was a disaster. Then we had kind of the remake of, all right, we're adding Christian Kirk, we're adding Zay Jones, and then obviously they had Calvin Ridley last year. Zay Jones probably not back with this team. Ridley is a free agent. They probably are not going to sign him before the league year starts, because then they have to send a second round pick. So he might test the market. He's not a lock to be back. Trevor Lawrence wants him to come back, but they could add other players along with that too. So I'm curious what that group around Trevor Lawrence looks like this coming season.
Jamal Agnew is also an unrestricted free agent. Christian Kirk is a possible cut candidate as well. Obviously not if they lose all the other three. Kirk could either be cut or he could massively benefit if Ridley leaves, and Zay Jones, as you mentioned, another possible cut candidate. So that's the key here with Jacksonville. Their wide receiver core could look entirely different next year. And unfortunately, It may not matter who the pass catchers are because Press Taylor returns at offensive coordinator, and that's a bummer for fantasy managers. And Trevor Lawrence, just simply, as I wrote, he's not the prince we were promised. You know, he looks, maybe there's room for growth and he'll be better and all that, but he is not the guy that we thought was him. You know, he's going to be some superstar. Unfortunately, that just hasn't been the case so far. And that's I think expectations need to be changed at this point for Lawrence's future. And the fact he has Press Taylor, you know, bulky at GM still there. I mean, what are they doing in Jacksonville?
What do you think Trevor Lawrence's like ceiling is as an NFL quarterback? Like, so you're just counting him out completely as what, like a top 3, top 5, top 8 type quarterback?
No. He could be top 8. I just meant he's not going to be the superstar league of his own top 3 type quarterback. No, I could see him top 8, and there's nothing wrong with that either. But no, I mean, we had super high expectations. Let's not forget. I mean, this guy looked like he was, you know, a sure thing. But now my expectations just more like top 8.
Yeah.
Is that fair? Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I mean, he hasn't consistently been a top 8 quarterback.
He hasn't even been there yet.
In my opinion, I think he's shown flashes and there have been times, but I don't think he's consistently been that guy. But yeah, I think he could end up being somewhere between that like 5 to 8 range. And look, if you spend the number 1 overall pick on the 5th to 8th best quarterback in the NFL, that's great. Like, you just kind of have to take the expectations and yeah, maybe put that out of your mind. I see what you're saying.
He can make all the throws. He's physically gifted. He can run. But I mean, his off-target numbers last year were concerning, and he's like been one of the bottom quarterbacks in the league when off his first read. I don't love that. I don't love that. But a lot of unrealized air yards, and Calvin Ridley could have had like 4 more touchdowns with half a foot difference in the end zone last year. And there's room for improvement, but I think it's going to be harder for him to improve with Press Taylor as his offensive coordinator.
I agree with you. That was an uninspiring, like, non-move made by Doug Peterson. But we've seen this story with Doug Peterson before. This is exactly how and why his tenure in Philadelphia ended. Loyalty to Press Taylor, actually. So this is, again, a very familiar tone with this coaching staff. All right, next team up here, Cincinnati Bengals. Question for them. Will Joe Burrow be/stay healthy? I know that obviously there are other questions on this team. Is Joe Mixon going to be back? What do they do with T. Higgins? But to me, it all starts with an unanswerable question here, which is just Joe Burrow's health. At this point, we're starting to stack up a lot of injuries with Burrow. Where are you at with that as a level of concern here when thinking about investing in this Bengals offense?
Yeah, the wrist thing was so weird last season, but I don't know. Injuries happen. It's not like it's the same one recurring. So he is a star, Burrow, and that team, when they were healthy, when they went into San Francisco, they beat a Niners team coming off back-to-back losses who brought their borderline A game, and Cincinnati won on the road with them just slinging it around the field. So I think there's upside here. A good defensive coordinator who makes halftime adjustments. So, I mean, the Bengals have Super Bowl upside next year with or without Higgins coming back. But yeah, it all depends on Burrow's health. Yeah,
and of course, I think I've gone from thinking that T. Higgins is going to play elsewhere to now thinking he's probably going to be a Bengal in 2024, which is probably best for all involved. Of course, it'd be great if he could, I don't know, for the Panthers' sake, if you go be Bryce Young's number 1 receiver. But I think if you have T. Higgins in Dynasty or anything like that, you probably just want him to stay in Cincinnati.
Yeah, compared to Carolina, I would take it. Yeah, and Chase, by the way, has been drafted behind those other receivers, in that tier, but just as likely to finish number 1 too. I love him if you can get him in the back half of the first round.
Next team up here, LA Rams. Is there any reason to be skeptical of Puka Nacua and Kyren Williams? My answer is no, but there's not a lot of questions open for this team, so I struggled with one to kind of put there. I guess just sort of a question that could be tangentially related to this is, the Rams went from being a team that was pushing all the chips in, all that stuff. They spend a lot of resources to then they kind of went broke to now they didn't spend a lot of resources on this roster last year, didn't spend a lot of cash on this roster. They have money and resources to burn this year. Do we see them add a bunch of pieces on offense to kind of make that next final push? Or is Sean McVay content and enjoying coaching this kind of young roster that we don't see them make those veteran type moves this season?
Yeah, McVay certainly looked rejuvenated coaching last year. The Rams quietly led the NFL in yards per play when Stafford, Williams, Kupp, and Nacua were on the field. Nacua is going as a top 10 fantasy pick in early drafts.
Baby.
I mean, it is aggressive. But yeah, we had one of the best rookie seasons in NFL history, and I'm more skeptical of Kyren Williams just because of the durability. I mean, let's not forget that he also suffered an injury in the playoff game, and he would have been out like multiple weeks too at the end of the year too, had the season continued or at least played compromised. So durability is something I would be concerned with there. I expect the Rams to probably address their backup running back position. That said, McVay goes heavily on his feature backs, and Williams will be like a top 5 fantasy back when on the field next year. But just durability is my only question there. And if you want to go deeper, Demarcus Robinson is an unrestricted free agent, so maybe Atwell reemerges as the wide receiver 3. I mean, Robinson was putting up serious target numbers down the stretch there. So that's just one other part of the offense to pay attention to. But we got McVay returning. We got Mike LaFleur returning. This Rams offense looks great when healthy, and maybe Kupp's even healthier next year. I know he's older, but maybe he somehow avoids the injuries that limited him throughout last season.
Yeah, I just wonder if they add like a needle-moving pass catcher or running back or something like that. Just because, I mean, you'd think they would just go all in on defense, trying to fix that side of the ball. Because not that they had a bad defense last year, but they lose Raheem Morris. They were really super young on that side of the ball. So you imagine they go there, but they could add a skill position player that shakes up the target distribution here or shakes up the running back distribution. It's just something to keep an eye on with this team, because other than that, I think they're pretty well set to be a very good fantasy offense this coming year. Next one up here, Pittsburgh Steelers. Big question for them. Do they have something better planned than a Mason Rudolph v. Kenny Pickett camp battle? Do they have something better than that up their sleeve? They better. I think they do. They better, because that is way too uninspiring of an answer for this team. A new quarterback would really juice up a lot of the options here. That we like George Pickens, we like Deontay Johnson, we like the running backs here. Pat Freiermuth's a pretty good tight end. Again, it just comes down to the quarterback position here. And I personally like the hire of Arthur Smith for these players as well. So we'll see what happens. But this is another team that comes down to their quarterback solution.
What about Tony Romo discovering who Jaylen Warren was while broadcasting an NFL playoff game? Good stuff there. Great interview with Greg Olson, by the way. Great interview there. There was some subtweets there, but anyway, great, great stuff there. But Anyway, Justin Fields, I forget the connections, but somehow there's connection there. Coaching staff, maybe Tomlin loves him or something. But if I had to bet now, I'm telling you, Fields is going to the Steelers. Is what it sounds like.
I have been saying Fields to the Steelers since the end of last season. I've been talking about it on this podcast. I think that's a great solution for them. I think it'd be great for Arthur Smith's offense. The connection I think that was made was Adam Schefter reported that, Mike Tomlin loves Justin Fields. I will just say, not the only thing I heard last week in terms of high-ranking Steelers decision makers loving Justin Fields. So that drumbeat is building in the league. I think that's a possibility, and I think that would be a big upgrade for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Look, Justin Fields is not perfect, but Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph ain't even close to that, okay? And Rudolph, at least once he got in there and pushed the ball down the field and played with some semblance of accuracy, that was good for these offensive players there. And I mean, we talked about Justin Fields being great for DJ Moore, a lot of those like man coverage, tight coverage situations. That sure lines up with what George Pickens does well. So I think a Fields trade there would be great for a lot of players involved. But again, so that there's a drumbeat building there for a lot of different reasons. Fields to the Steelers, just keep an eye out on it.
Yeah, and used to playing outdoors in bad weather like Chicago, so I could see the fit there. But absolutely something to pay attention to. It looks like to me that looks like what's going to happen.
Next one up here, Miami Dolphins. Do we get the same backfield rotation as last year? I can already tell that the Devon Achane wars on fantasy Twitter, they're going to be hot and heavy, buddy. I imagine he's a guy that you're probably going to be drafting a lot of.
I know it's very disappointing, but I don't have a hot take here because you just see both sides. I mean, obviously, he could win your league. He finished with the highest DVOA ranking ever from a running back with 100 rushes. His efficiency was historically good, but leaving every other game injured. But Raheem Mostert, 33, 34? I mean, the upside is so clearly there, and so is the downside. But Achane looks like he's going to, cost you a mid-second round pick. So I haven't fully formed my opinion here. I mean, the biggest boomer bust fantasy pick of 2024, without a doubt.
Yep, and that's again why I think I'm just curious if we get the same group of guys back that we did last year. Mostert's going to be a really interesting guy to rank. Achane's going to be a really interesting guy to rank. And what if they add another body to this rotation in this room? That would really shake things up as well.
I think an interesting debate is you might scoff at first, but I think CeeDee Lamb versus Tyreek Hill is going to be is closer than people think.
You're not going to get it. No.
Okay. All right.
Who's scoffing at that?
Okay. Well, Hill. All right. Okay. Good. I'm glad. Okay. All right. So you agree it's close.
Yeah. I mean, CeeDee Lamb was the number one receiver last year, right?
Yeah, okay.
So,
all right. Okay. Well, yeah, I guess Hill did fall off so much at the end there, and Lamb was so amazing. All right. Okay. So maybe that's not a hot take whatsoever. Okay. But yeah, Lamb could be the number one fantasy wide off the board this year.
Yeah, receiver rankings are going to be interesting to discuss next year. That is for sure. Next team up here, Philadelphia Eagles. Question with them: can Kellen Moore's offense move the needle? We're doing like a division preview, big group piece with the NFL folks. We also got divisions. I picked the NFC East. My big question with Kellen Moore is just like, can he do more with less? Stick with me here because I'm going to say more a lot, but can he do more with less? Because I think we all agree that the mark of a great coach, great play caller, is being able to do more with less. And they have great players in Philadelphia, so you could honestly argue actually that we want Kellen Moore to do more with more, if that makes sense, because what the Eagles were doing last year is they were doing less with more, right? You see what I'm saying here? So we want Kellen Moore to come in there and do more with more. After this group last year, Brian Johnson as a play caller was doing less with more, because these players are all going to come at a premium in drafts this season. We definitely need better scheming, better player deployment than what we got out of the Eagles last year. So I don't really have a hot take on Kellen Moore. I've been kind of all over the place with him as a coordinator. He's got to be a home run hire for this Eagles offense to hit its potential, which it did not do last year.
Yeah, they missed Steichen badly last year. I figure Kellen Moore can't be any worse than the offensive coordinator situation last year. Or, both coordinators. Philadelphia dramatically missed losing both coordinators last season. A.J. Brown's a tricky one to rank next year because the volume was so there and then fell off in the second half. My other question with Philadelphia, I would say, is Jason Kelce's retirement. Was that affect the tush push? Is that a thing or not? Do you have an opinion on that, Harmon?
I mean, has to, right? It also has to affect the entire offense. Like, people don't realize this, but in that offense, Jason Kelce bears so much responsibility in terms of getting to the line, changing protections, identifying blitzers and stuff like that the quarterback doesn't have to do. There's a lot that's not on Jalen Hurts' shoulders, and I wonder if that changes if Kelce does retire. I mean, because Schefter reported he was retiring, but then Kelce kind of pushed back on it. But it does seem like he's probably not coming back this year.
Yeah, that's something to think about because, man, Hurts got a lot of his fantasy value from getting those short rushing touchdowns.
Yeah, and of course, so that's the run game impact, right, for Hurts. But I also think there's an overall offensive impact for losing a player like this that has to be factored in some way. And that's I'm with you. They're a tough offense to project this coming year. All right, next team up here, an equally tough offense to project: Cleveland Browns. Question for them is, can Deshaun Watson and Nick Chubb return healthy? And I mean, shoot, what does this offense look like this season? I have no idea what to think of the Browns for this coming year.
Yeah, and it was a devastating knee injury for Chubb. I don't know. It's rough. And Watson was outplayed by Flacco, who looks unlikely to return. Yeah, I don't know. Cleveland doesn't look like a great situation, obviously. Amari Cooper soaks up the targets there, and Njoku was such a beast with Flacco. But, yeah, man, I think we're just going to expect Watson to return and perform like, the 15th to 24th best quarterback in the league, right? I mean, something like that. Yeah. I
mean, dude, 15th best quarterback in the league would be huge.
Yeah, not even. It's a
that would be a big improvement.
Yeah, it would.
You just look, you look at this offense, like where they were just week 13 on. So now that we're kind of removed from the mystique and the fun of the Joe Flacco era, they were 27th in EPA per dropback. They were 24th in dropback success rate. They had some big productive moments. Obviously, they weren't a good run team either. Even the actual just like down consistency of the offense wasn't there with Flacco, and Flacco was a huge upgrade on Deshaun Watson. So that's where that this is just not a great. I just don't know what to make of this team this year. They're one of the more confounding teams this season.
Flacco was somehow a huge upgrade over Watson and highly overrated with 1 million turnover-worthy plays that caught up to him in the playoffs. I mean, it was
what a journey.
It's bad though with Watson if that's the bar you were trying to clear. I mean. And you could tell by the coaching they trusted Flacco more.
Yeah,
I mean, if you can
right.
tell how coaches trust their players by actions more than words, and he just called it a more aggressive game plan with Flacco than he did Watson.
100%. I think that's inarguable looking at the film last year, just that they trusted, and Flacco was much better running the offense than Deshaun Watson has been as a Cleveland Brown player so far. All right, next team up here, Dallas Cowboys. Question for them is a little more micro than some of the others. Is just who is the starting running back for this team? Because I think the passing game is pretty much all set. Coaching staff all set. They all came back. They're doing this thing again. I think the running back spot is the only thing that's kind of up in the air for this team right now.
I think as Pollard's explosive broken tackle rates numbers that's typically sticky and it normalizes quickly started improving over the second half, which is some encouragement that he was recovering from his major ankle surgery.
Yeah,
but
he told me in Vegas that he did not feel like himself, or he didn't feel like his old self until the Panthers game in week 11 last year. So that was just something I think we all collectively yada yada a little too much.
Right. Oh, yeah.
I think we definitely need to learn a lesson from that. Also just projecting a guy from a new role or an old role into a bigger, more expanded role. He talked about how that was a little bit of a difficult thing for him. That's good. You can find that interview. People can find it on my Twitter page, Yahoo Sports, YouTube, all that. Not the most talkative guy there, Tony Pollard, but those two notes I think were interesting from him. So, I mean, Pollard could be back with this team, but I don't know. I go back and forth on where this run game can go next year.
Yeah, even with his explosiveness returning, it's not like he lit up the box score down the stretch. But I was going to throw it back to you and say, yeah, you tell us the inside information. You talk to Pollard, but this is absolutely a situation that fantasy managers need to pay attention to because, I mean, Pollard got 1 million goal line carries. Zeke got 1 million goal line carries. So if whomever it is, even if it's a day 2 rookie or something, if whoever the feature back on that offense is highly fantasy important.
Yeah, I think, definitely keep an eye out for them using like a day 2 pick on a running back. I think that probably makes the most sense. All right, next team up here, Green Bay Packers. Are we going to get any clues on how to sort out the pass catchers this offseason? I feel like we won't, and I feel like it's going to be a really tough group to sort out because, man, I mean, I believe in Jordan Love. I believe in Matt LaFleur. I just don't quite know how to sort out this group of pass catchers because they're all good to some degree.
They have 2 good tight ends. I was convinced Dobbs is the 4th on this list, and he's the guy that was the best in the playoffs with the most important times of the year. So I'm confused. I guess it'll just come down to ADP for me, and I will trust you with Jaden Reed, even though he disappeared in the playoffs. But I'll trust you with Jaden Reed's route running and Christian Watson's inability to stay healthy and probably go after Reed. But it'll all just come down to ADP on these guys because I don't think we'll get any clarity, and I'm sure they'll change weekly.
Yeah, that's the thing is I feel like this could just be a group very Saints-esque back in the Breeze days where they just had like a lot of guys they threw at you. I feel like that could end up being this team because Wicks is good too.
Even Wicks is really good. Yes. Yeah. You look at the nerd stats. Yeah, Wicks is like really good. Yeah, even Melton for the 5th is not bad.
Yeah, it's pretty wild what they got going on there. All right, next team up here, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Question for them: can they bring back Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans amid other free agency concerns?
Baker is the guy we should have been talking about as far as quarterbacks who could end up elsewhere. He played totally pretty competent football last year, as Andy Behrens predicted. I don't have many thoughts on the Tampa Bay situation here. What happens in free agency? They have so many of their skill position players are a possibility to leave. So yeah, this is just a situation you have to just see what shakes out.
Yeah, that's kind of why I just left it pretty simple there because we don't know anything until we know if those 2 guys are going to be back there. Pretty critical pieces there for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. All right, next team up here, Houston Texans. Who can they bring in at running back? Again, I think they are set at receiver with Nico and Tank. Maybe they should and will, and I think that'd be a good idea to bring in some role players around those guys, but I don't think they need a big swing at receiver. But I would love to know who's going to be the running back on this team, man, because I'd be very interested in investing in that player if they were a good guy.
100%. Devin Singletary is an unrestricted free agent. A lead back on this offense has potential to be top 5 fantasy back if they did emerge as a feature back, given Stroud And Collins and Tank Dell are both going like top 26-ish right now in early drafts. So, it'd be great if you could draft Collins in the second, Dell in the third, and then get Stroud. I wouldn't hate that strategy. I best balls, I'm sure Stroud goes higher. But Singletary, unrestricted free agent. Robert Woods will turn 32. Dalton Schultz and Noah Brown are also free agents. So, yeah, I mean, just Collins, Dell, and Stroud to the moon, and then whoever plays running back.
Yeah, I guess just generally filtering all of those role players around those three guys is going to be a big thing this offseason. I just wonder with all the cap space they have if they take a big swing at one of these veteran running backs, or they just
Barkley
for the draft. That's a good. Yeah, I mean Barkley would be sick.
I mean,
Barkley would be sick.
It'd be an early. Awesome. Yeah.
All right, next team up here, Buffalo Bills. What does their wide receiver room look like? Diggs probably back with the team. Would be my guess. Probably back with the team. Khalil Shakir, I think, is a nice player, but they need they need both a downfield player who can legit separate, which Gabe Davis was a downfield player, but couldn't legit separate. They also need, I think, an heir apparent to Stephon Diggs, even if he is on the roster next year. Can they accomplish that by taking a first-round receiver this year? Because they pick late in the first round, of course, when all those big like alpha dog guys are going to go in the top 5 to 10 picks.
Diggs, you talked to yourself. What a weird year last year. Another guy who fell off the targets in the second half of the season. And he seemed to me he wasn't blamed on an injury, or he just saying it is what it is, the new coordinator, and it's just kind of shook out that way. But Diggs is definitely a tricky one, given his age.
Yeah, he's tough.
He's a tough one to rank next year, but he's still going as a top 25 pick,
which I think is right because he doesn't think there's any drop off in his game. I don't think there's a ton of drop off in his game, which makes the whole situation so weird with the drop off in production. But I mean, I think they were definitely changing offenses midway. And like, yeah, I don't think he looked any different, like to me, really, from a separation standpoint. So he's probably he's not as explosive, which is going to happen with all these receivers as they age, but still a lot of room for him to be a very good and productive player. And if he catches that ball in the playoffs, are we having this conversation? If Josh Allen hits him in stride on a couple deep in-breaking routes at the end of the regular season, are we having this conversation? It's just obviously, and just the general vibe around Diggs, people love to speculate. So I'm very curious what happens with him in terms of the role in this offense. And I think, again, either way, they need to add more receiver help here. That is a must this offseason.
I wish he had caught that ball, Harmon.
Yeah. I'm sure you do, buddy. I'm sure you do, buddy. All right, we're down to the final 4 teams here. Detroit Lions. Are we running the same group back out there this year? Ben Johnson comes back. Both running backs will be back. Montgomery, Gibbs, Laporta, St. Brown. Josh Reynolds is a free agent. That's really the only change that's going to happen here in terms of the skill position players. Offensive line mostly returning intact, at least all the big name pieces returning intact. Jameson Williams, are they going to add another outside receiver here? Because at times I thought they needed one. If Reynolds doesn't come back, you'd imagine he probably will come back to this team. He's just a Goff, and a lot of these guys, he's like a Goff lifer. I don't know, man. I think there's room for them to take a big swing at outside receiver, but I could see them convincing themselves we don't need to. And we'll just see if Williams develops in year 3 of his career, even though it seems like he barely has played.
Yeah, I get that Williams has upside super fast, and maybe Amon-Ra St. Brown suffers a serious injury, but I will surprise you and say that this young receiver is a guy I'm probably going to be out on at ADP. Williams he's Detroit's 5th option on offense, and they're a run first team. I mean, he's literally behind Laporta, St. Brown, Montgomery, and Gibbs. I mean, on any given play. So, I think people are going to be excited for him to look at his college career playing indoors and an injury away from a bigger role. I see the potential, but he's a guy I'll probably be fading in that situation. But Gibbs is going to be highly drafted, top 15 overall pick, despite Montgomery replacing him most of the time inside the 5. And I get it. Looks like a special player, and he's going to get plenty of touches to return that value in this system. So, and then the other argument is Laporta is probably the number 1 tight end off the board. Kelsey had a nice finish to make that a more interesting argument. But this is a setup in Detroit that's going to produce a lot of good fantasy players.
Jameson Williams doesn't command a lot of targets. A lot of the reasons, like you said, because he's not a guy that He's not one of their top 3 target getters. He's not one of their, and then they have the run game. There's that part of it. And then he doesn't consistently separate enough to be a high-end target earner. Like, that's problematic here as well. So he's still, when you watch him, looks like a developmental player, which makes sense because he's had such a weird career so far. So I'm with you. I can't see him being a guy that if he gets pushed up draft boards, I'd be all that excited about.
He scored 2 touchdowns last time we saw him in the playoff game, though. I think he will get pushed up. I mean, there is. I mean, he had like the highest. He's got some fast numbers too. So he's an exciting player. But yeah, I'm glad you're on board with me here because he's an inconsistent player even outside of the inconsistent role.
All right, third team to the end here. Baltimore Ravens. What tweaks will the Lamar-Monken partnership roll out in 2024? Think we can all agree that the first year of these two guys together, Todd Monken play calling, Lamar Jackson quarterback, raging success until they played in the AFC Championship game. Raging success. But what does version 2.0 look like for this group?
Yeah, interesting. Everyone gave him such a hard time for having just 5 or 6 design carries against the Chiefs, and that makes sense. But man, the Niners had coming to the Super Bowl. They led the league in rush EPA against the Chiefs. It was would have ranked last by a mile, their rush EPA. So Chiefs just stacked the box, whatever it is, man. I mean, their defensive strategy worked the following week. So I don't think Baltimore could consider anything but a huge success this season with Monken and Lamar's second MVP. And next year they'll be even more exciting in year 2 with Zay Flowers. And if they actually get if they could actually get a couple weeks of their running back that they'd like to start the season with, more than a few games worth too, that would be helpful too. I mean, so yeah, I mean, imagine if Bateman gets healthier, which is actual possibility. So likely would replace an injured Andrews or an aging Andrews. So a lot to like in Baltimore.
Yeah, I mentioned Zay Flowers. This kind of fell under the radar during Super Bowl week, but keep an eye out on the alleged domestic incident with Zay Flowers. Domestic violent incident that was being investigated right now. So don't know what's going on there, but obviously that's something to keep an eye on. They'd be in rough shape if he was not playing football for them. That's all I'd say there. All right, final team here in the NFC. Your San Francisco 49ers, Dalton. My question for them is simple. Can they just survive variance after a clean 2023? I don't know. I mean, I'm just going to turn the floor over to you. Niners, where are we at?
Oh, man. Let's talk a little Shanahan, the topic of the week. I'm frustrated with the guy ignoring offensive line at drafts and drafting kickers and bad running backs. The overtime decision, I straight up said at the time, what are you doing? Like, why are you want more information? But I get the argument too that getting the third possession is so important, and the math plays that out as a tough choice there. The defense was exhausted. What about more Ayuk? Whose fault is that, Shanahan or Purdy, for not targeting Ayuk more when the Chiefs went surprisingly a ton of man coverage? And you know better than anyone, Ayuk is better against man than Debo. And Debo had 11 targets or something. McDuffie just pwned him the whole time, basically. So what are your thoughts on that? Whose fault does that lie on, Purdy or Shanahan?
I mean, Snead was winning some of those matchups with Ayuk too, so let's be clear about that. But I mean, great defensive back play there in Kansas City. I think that there's a lot of issues there. I think that the biggest thing is that from a drop back pass standpoint, they don't have great hot answers when you're hot on one side. When you've got blitzers coming, they don't have. It's usually just like, if we're seeing zone back there, we get the ball to Debo when we're getting blitzed. And that's usually a great answer because then he can rip off those huge plays. When you throw the man coverage part into it, I think it was just like the quarterback is not equipped to do that. And there's not a great answer for him there anyways, because you got to get that ball out fast because you're under pressure. And like you said, the offensive line, not a sound group there anyways. There was a lot of blown assignments there from that offensive line. So it's a little bit of like a chicken and egg situation in terms of whose fault it is. Okay. I do think that they should have been more flexible mid-game to be like, all right, we need to sort of change what we're doing schematically here so we could put Ayuk in more of these man-beating situations, or he needs to be the first read on these plays, because it did not look or appear like that was the case to me.
props to Shanahan for going for it on that fourth down, even in the losing effort. He needs to get credit for that. He would have never done that in the past. Purdy was pressured on 20 of his 41 dropbacks. The offensive line had major issues costing the Super Bowl. Purdy led all quarterbacks in adjusted net yards per attempt when pressured this season, despite his receivers adding only an average amount of yards after the catch. My final thought on this Niners really is just simply this. If Brock Purdy wasn't the MVP or an afterthought in the voting, despite having by far the best season statistically, then it is I'll try not to cuss, but it's a joke that Shanahan is not the coach of the year then. I mean, you can't have it both ways here. It's one or the other there. People are upset with Shanahan, but the reality is I would only trade Kyle Shanahan for Patrick Mahomes and CJ Stroud, and that's it. As far in the NFL, I'd rather Shanahan would be my next pick. Dude's 44 years old. And yeah, man, what are you going to do? The Chiefs, not only do they have Mahomes, I don't know if you saw this silly stat, but there have been 120 drives since 2001 where the QB getting the ball with less than a minute to play. And, in the fourth quarter, trailing by 7 points or more. And Mahomes is 7 for 7. He's perfect in those dire situations. With less than a minute left, trailing by 7 in the playoff, he's 7 for 7, producing a touchdown. I mean, he's next level. And the Chiefs defense, by the way, allowed the most games with fewer than 25 points in NFL history this season. 20 games they allowed their opponents fewer than 25 points, and they allowed the fewest yards per play when healthy. So they had an awesome defense, well-deserving, and congrats to them. But yeah, so those are my thoughts on the Niners. What are you going to do, man? They're going to bring it back. Ayuk, his fifth-year option was picked up. His best friend or whoever's trying to say that he's trying to interested in a trade. But I mean, Shanahan loves him because he's taught him all the blocking and all that. But fifth-year option, I expect him back. But this is it. This is the run. I mean, they maybe have one more year, and good luck everyone staying healthy too. Good luck with that. I mean, Trent Williams is returning, but good luck to enter the playoffs. And stay healthy, man. Everyone left injured there. Kittle missed overtime and his replacement committed a holding penalty on that drive. And Debo suffered a hamstring injury, was down. McCaffrey was clearly banged up. Mitchell's aren't getting those touches unless McCaffrey's banged up. And then obviously the Greenlaw running onto the field, not even during a play, suffering the Achilles injury that will make him lose all of next season too. So a lot of injuries in the Super Bowl.
And his backup was not good in coverage, and there were several situations where, you really just want that's how the Super Bowl goes. There's a lot of like, man, what if that didn't happen? This one seemed extreme in terms of like, man, you flip one thing, which it was a good, close, competitive game. Somebody's got to lose. You flip one thing in the Niners' favor, and maybe we're talking about a different result here. We're talking about a much happier Dalton Del Don leaving Las Vegas on Sunday and Monday.
6 of 7 fumbles, recovering 6 of 7 fumbles, and a missed extra point. Just brutal. All 4 touchdowns and I think most of the field goals were on my side. I was on, so I did luck out there. I was on that corner, so every single touchdown here or there. What a pretty play that was to McCaffrey from Jennings. Jennings could have 3 touchdowns if Purdy's not blown up on that play. The drive in overtime. Even though your guy Ayuk's open in the end zone, Jennings was his read. He would have scored if not. He might want to block Chris Jones on the most important play of the season. I don't know. It's just a thought. He might want to put one body on Chris Jones. But what do I know?
My new best friend Spencer Burford may not have been in the right on that play. So there is that. But yeah, look, I think you hit it right on the head though with the Niners in terms of projecting them for fantasy in the regular season next year. It's just like, can this, like I said, can this group stay on the right side of variance? Because they were overall pretty healthy last year. Mm-hmm. Williams and Debo missed some time, but overall they were all pretty healthy in the regular season. In the Super Bowls, some of that variance was on the wrong side there. So I really think that's just what it is here. And that's simple analysis, but it is what it is. So let's talk Chiefs here. We don't have to spend a ton of time on the Chiefs because we've talked so much Chiefs, obviously with the Super Bowl win just a few short days ago. But big question here is just who are they going to add at the skill position spots? Because like I talked about with Andy on Monday, I think it's a blank slate at outside receiver. I think they can add running back help to go alongside Pacheco there. Wouldn't even hate like a tight end addition given how much like heavy personnel they play at times. So we could be definitely looking at some new target competition there at different points for this offense, especially if they lose a Chris Jones or a Snead on defense, which I don't know. We'll see if that happens, but you got to be thinking they're a candidate to add some serious contenders at the skill position spots.
If you're not going to give the league MVP to the person who had the best season, then you give it to the best player, and that's Patrick Mahomes. But never mind. I have thoughts, Harmon. I'll eventually let it go. The Chiefs defense is very frustrating leading up to the Super Bowl. Hearing just everyone talk about this is Mahomes' worst team or whatever because people are fixated with these skill position players. That's why Purdy has these stars to throws to, and Mahomes had all these drops in prime time. Their defense allowed the fewest yards per play in the NFL when they had their dudes healthy. That is the most. I'm not saying some EPA or DVOA or anything stat. The fewest yards per play on defense, and they dominated in the postseason. Doing that to Shanahan offense is impressive. And then in Baltimore, whatever. This Bolton had how many tackles? He's still recording the tackle, I think, in the Super Bowl. These guys are dudes. McDuffie, Snead, and when you also have the greatest quarterback or the second greatest quarterback of all time, that's a pretty good combo. And you got a coach that has no plans of leaving anytime soon. To say this is a dynasty is an understatement. It might be the very beginning of one.
On top of all of it, Steve Spagnuolo to pitch a game plan that the Niners were clearly not expecting with all of that man coverage, and they weren't necessarily playing that way in the first few drives. They sort of did that midstream, and Spags got the edge on Shanahan in that game. So all that combined was a big reason why this Chiefs team was good this past year. But again, if they lose some of these defensive pieces, just natural regression on defense, because we know it's not the stickier unit between the two. Do we see the defense come down a little bit? And what can the offense do to sort of add pieces here to stave off some of that regression on that side of the ball?
Yeah, aren't the Chiefs doing this with weak tackles? Tooney was out too, but the Chiefs can really improve their tackle situation on offense.
True.
It's
Great
just Mahomes is just such a cheat code. He prevents so many sacks, and he's just impossible back against the wall. It's a pleasure to watch him. What a football player.
Yeah, you got to see Pat Mahomes live in a Super Bowl. If you ignore the team that he beat, Dalton, that's a pretty awesome opportunity for you personally. Hey, man, great podcast. I'm almost kind of bummed that it was sandwiched between talk of your Niners losing the Super Bowl, and then because of the way that the show flows, the draft order, we had to do it again here at the end. Because other than that, great show that I think it kind of gives us an off-season primer here for these teams going forward, man.
Yeah, Chiefs also got Steve Wilkes fired right before we recorded this too. Niners defensive coordinator. Well, that and a few other reasons. But thank you for my therapy session.
Real quick though, was your reaction to that? Because you've obviously watched the Niners closer than anybody. What was your reaction to the Steve Wilkes firing?
At first, I thought, I understand people, another Shanahan scapegoat, and the dude, the defense was okay in the Super Bowl. It allowed, the one drive was after the punt muff, it was a 20-yard drive touch. Basically, it allowed 0 touchdowns through 4.5 quarters for the Mahomes there. But that said, Shanahan had a called timeout. He was playing so far back in overtime. They were unprepared for the zone read, Nick Bosa says. And I think it was an ill fit from the beginning. Wilkes had to move from the booth down below. He's a cornerbacks guy. They're a defensive line team. And I think the locker room wasn't totally sold. And there was a lot of situations here. It is wild how the NFL, Wilkes legitimately was interviewed for a head coaching position 2 times. 2 different teams interviewed him for a head coaching position 2 weeks ago, and now he's fired. Overall, they dropped in all the nerd stats EPA compared to the year before, and they have a loaded roster. So I get it. I get it. If they bring in Vrabel, Belichick, or who's the other? Oh, Staley, I guess maybe could be those. But bringing in Vrabel or Belichick wouldn't take much to get me excited there. That would be cool. But thanks again for this therapy session, Harmon. Another Niners brutal loss.
Yeah, I think it was Tim Kawakami who said basically Steve Wilkes' job was to sell himself to Shanahan and the players, and he didn't do either throughout the course of the season. And we talked about on this show a lot that this defense was not that good, especially from a run defense perspective. It was an issue. Pretty good Super Bowl performance, but I thought it was a strange reaction.
But the Chiefs' offense has been getting shut down also too, even
exactly.
then. So that's
I thought it was a strange mixed reaction to people that just obviously Steve Wilkes is a good coach. That Shanahan said that he's a good coach. It just there wasn't a fit here. People that I know that follow and watch the Niners closely were we're not surprised by this move, and some were even relieved because of the move. Whereas a lot of national people were outraged by it. So I thought that mixed reaction was interesting and just something to talk about here. But buddy, I appreciate you doing the show with me. And again, I'm sorry we had to sandwich all the good stuff with sandwich between Niners pain.
No, good times, man. As always, appreciate you, Harmon.
All right, that is going to do it for us. Promises pod for a while. Like I've been saying, coaching carousel catch up is going to be next Tuesday. It's going to be our only show of the week, by the way. We're only going to do one show next week. Give me a little time here, a little time to do some catching up on some other stuff as we head into the offseason. So again, next Tuesday, the Ringer's Ben Solak joins me. Look at all the hires that have taken place. What are the best offensive ecosystems and best coaching staffs? How are they set up to help some of these players in 2024? Got that to look forward to. Until then, we're out.